after about a month of her capture, or a little further into it, she really started to develop Stockholm syndrome, and I think you did a really good job at kind of describing her mindset going into this. What other factors do you think during that month of time really played into her Stockholm syndrome starting to take hold?
I think the fact that he started minute, like that pig, definitely kind of was a big piece of her allowing herself to trust him, because I think it's when she's some part down in the basement when she's left in the darkness, she starts to see certain things and she just gives up and she's like, well, either I go in 100% or I'm going to die down here. So that was kind of her decision to give in to him and to start doing everything that he wanted, because she didn't want to die, and she was willing to do whatever it took to keep herself from dying. But eventually, once she started giving into all those things, it just became normal, and it stopped being because I want to live, and it became, well, because I want him happy.
Okay. And when she was finally taken out of the basement, she turned this basement into an extreme fearful thing, which kind of led into the Dark Man, which we'll talk a little bit more about. But how do you think the basement overall impacted her once she was taken upstairs and then she was threatened to go back down? She was given a nasty wool blanket. She was given a space heater, and still she wasn't given light, and she was finally taken out of the basement and then forced to go back in it after he had kind of shown her a life where if she behaved and followed rules, she would not have to go down there. How much of an impact do you think that had on her?
It definitely showed her that her rules were there for a reason, that if she followed them, then she wouldn't have to go down there, because at this point, she has the Dark Man's there, and that terrifies her just about as much as the basement does. And she knows that the Dark Man is down there with her, and the only place, at least in that point, where he's not is upstairs. And the only place where she's safe is upstairs. So she is willing to do whatever she needs to do to not have to go down there, because of every like little tiny thing that had occurred down there, and the trauma that came with it, and the painful memories that constantly are in her brain every time she gets close to that door, that damn lock.
Yes, we made a big deal of the clacking sound of the lock. Do you think that also played a role on her psychological mindset?
Yeah, if she hears that sound again, it's not going to be good.
Um,
I think that and those spaghettios are pretty big triggers for the basement.
and like I had read in a book of somebody that was suffering from Stockholm syndrome and was kidnapped, and they had noticed every little detail about their kidnapper. Twitches of the lip, the way they moved, how they acted, when they spoke, when they were angry. But you kind of did this without that knowledge of this book that I had read, which is kind of where I took some inspiration. And I noticed that you were doing this. What kind of prompted you to have Ophelia start noticing these little minute details about Luke?
I think it's a mixture of things. I think it's just because me as a person, that's part of my job, is noticing every tiny little thing about the people that sit across from me, and that's just the sociology aspect of it all. Um, but when you're in this environment where there's literally nothing, once you're given something that will interact back with you, you're gonna start picking up on every tiny thing, because you're so starved of any kind of connection. It's like, oh, he's worn that shirt before. Oh, this is crooked. Oh, he combed his hair a different way this time, because it's been so long since she had any type of interaction that she's going to be like, oh, this is this, that it just follows the same into her rules. Like, oh, this happens when I do this, cause and effect relationships, and how she can have something to depend on when she has nothing else down there.
Okay. And when she started getting into the understanding of what was expected to her, was it all about lies, just to get rewarding behaviors, rewarding aspects, so she would lie and say this or lie and do that? When did those lies start to slip into a confusing reality for her? When did they stop becoming full lies and started to become more of a reality to her?
I think it's a mixture between when, I mean, I alluded to it because I was terrified of the site rules. When she realized that she perhaps was pregnant and had to figure out what to do about that, or when the house hopper people showed up. Those two situations were very big turning points in how she viewed Luke.
Okay, and she started longing for his attention. Even before she was fully released from the basement, she started longing to be near him. Even with the constant abuse, the other crimes that were taking place on her, the other assaults that were happening, the psychological damage that he was doing, she still wanted to be around him. Why did you have
Mm-hmm.
Ophelia do that?
So when you're in an abusive relationship and you're also placed in isolation like that, you can only depend on the other person that's in the relationship because typically you're completely and utterly alone. So you begin to identify with that person and want that kind of affection back if there is any, which he was showing her, which was a piece where she could use like, well, he's not always this way. There are times when he's not. Maybe he's better than I think he is. Yet again, it's her delusion of I'm isolated, I'm terrified down here, I've been abused, I've been intimidated, I've been threatened, so I need to identify more with him and want to be around him more because if I want that, you notice the change in his behavior of when she was more, I guess, honest
Right.
or forthcoming with her feelings.
When he realized that Ophelia was lying to him, he started taking things away from her, her blanket, the space heater, the little pig, um, and put her back on these cold raviolis again without spoon or fork or anything like that. Um, how much of an impact would that have to realize that he had come to the realization that she was lying to him and just doing these things for a reward and took all of the rewards that he'd started giving her away?
It would either have with her either came down to either she needs to be better at lying or she needs to suck it up and give in to what's happening because if she doesn't she's going to die because she got to a point where she was just so cold she started passing out, and she'd pass out for long periods of time and then she'd wake up and be all disoriented and be like, well, whoa, what's happening? She's cold, she's hungry, she's in a lot of pain. So at that point, it's desperation sinks in, and everything else kind of goes out the window.
And I want to talk, like, we've mentioned it a few times now, but let's really talk about the impact these cold raviolis had on
I hate those raviolis.
her. Like, how
uh,
much of an
uh,
impact would that have and why? Like, there was no fork or spoon or anything, but he would just take these cold raviolis, dump them into a bowl, and slide it over to her. Why did that have such a massive impact on somebody like Ophelia?
because she's very like just bougie and posh, and everything was elevated. She had a cook who made all of her meals. She never really made anything for herself. Occasionally, she made breakfast and she'd make herself coffee, but she never really made herself food. And even if she did, it was very expensive ingredients, hundreds and hundreds of dollars a week on groceries, and then to be slid a can that probably cost 50 cents of disgusting raviolis that are cold, it's going to be just a nightmare because even those things are very gelatinous and heavy and they taste fake, so she's going to not want to eat them. I feel like the first time she just didn't even want to eat them, which didn't end well.
Right, and there were all kinds of types, right? The spaghetti version, the spaghetti-o version, the ravioli version, and she was forced to try and eat these just to stay alive without you know, any silverware or anything.
Yeah, yeah. That I think that also was very demeaning because it's like she wasn't even a human anymore. She was forced down to the level of an animal that had to eat with her face or her hands.
So after this, like, dramatic change, she started willingly giving in to his demands. Was that just to avoid being hurt, or did she start to really give in to these demands?
Mm, I think a little bit of both. Like you'll see the dichotomy in each of the posts where she'll rationalize why she's doing it, and then she'll kind of double back on herself and make excuses of why she enjoys doing it. Which is the kind of the delusion taking hold of her identifying more with him and making fewer and fewer excuses of why she's doing certain things.
Let's talk a little bit about, I had started to explore how twisted Luke's upbringing was, because you have to be pretty twisted to be as psychotic and erotomania and all these other illnesses that he's got. You have to be a little twisted, and his upbringing had a lot to do with that. But when he first started stalking her, which was way back in, was it high school, right?
Yep.
What do you think drew Ophelia's to garner his attention in such a way?
I mean, she's very well off. She's very pretty. She was kind of when I made her, she was kind of the girl that everybody would want. So she's got the money, she has the body, she has the looks, the very vibrant red hair, so she stands out. She's just being an Adeline in and of itself. Always had people garnering for who she was, and she drew a lot. So she would wander around places and just sketch people because that was just what she did, which is also why she ended up at the museum because that's just kind of her thing. So she would go to the track and she would draw Luke and the rest of the people that ran just because she wanted practice. But from an outside perspective, it could have looked like she was really into him and would go to his meets to watch him.
And what drew her away from him, or what did she ever have any real interest in him during the high school years?
No, her family made it very clear that she was not to date anybody that they did not approve of, who her father did not set her up with. So she kind of never really allowed herself to fall in love. She fell in love once, um, but he ended up moving away. Her parents found out. It was a huge ordeal. Um, Plus, Luke was not exactly of high social standing, so he was off the table to begin with. So she didn't really ever give anyone at that school a second glance because it was a futile effort.
And when she was finally taken upstairs, she was let out of the basement officially and chained upstairs. She started to set more rules for herself, right? Like where to sit, how to act, anything to stay out of the basement and be taken back down there again. Why did she start to set these additional rules to the ones that she had already created once she was upstairs?
Since she was out of the basement, the rules that she made down there would no longer work because she's not in the same environment anymore. She's out kind of in the open. She has more things at her disposal. So she needs to create new rules, new mannerisms to account for the, what do we call it? The new schema that she is creating in that new reality. So you take the house in and of itself, but you have to break it down into basement plus house. So she had to figure out a way that she could differentiate how she needed to behave if she was in either location.
And she started doing things. How much of this was her playing tricks on him when she started saying things like their bed, their cabin, their home, their food, their breakfast? She started adding herself into a couple like situation. Was that intentional, or did she believe at that time that that was the way it was?
Initially, she did it, I believe, as kind of a fabrication to get him to be happier because she knows that when he's happy, she's safe. But then it slowly started to metamorphosize into what she actually believed was true. Because after a certain amount of months, she just like, I'm never leaving here. This is what my life is now. I'm accepting it, and I better get used to it because this is what it is.
And when he took her back to the basement to go jogging or something else like this seriously impacted her and led to the creation of the Dark Man, which we've touched based on before. Tell us a little bit more about what he represents and why he's a thing. Is he physical? Is he just a manifestation of her mind? What is the Dark Man?
Spoilers. Well, because I need to word this effectively. So the Dark Man is an entity that may or may not be real. That she has noticed has been down in the basement with her. He's this very gangly, dark, like jet black figure with these burning red eyes and these grotesque, like yellow teeth, and he lives under the crawl space in the basement steps. And he sits down there and he whispers things to her occasionally about how he wants her to hurt Luke, hurt herself, uh, very horrible, mean things about how she's awful, how she's going to die down there. Does she want to die? Um, because her brain, if you want to take it the way that the Dark Man is not real, look at it that way, then she created him because her psyche was fracturing and she needed something to keep her company down there. But all she has to work with is pain, suffering, and torment. So what her mind created would be the Dark Man. If he is not a manifestation of her subconscious, then it is in her belief, a demon that has come to the house wanting to feed off of her suffering. But he, at that point, is quote unquote stuck in the basement and can't leave because that's where the suffering is. That's where he needs to feed because that's where she has been existing in this perpetual torment for the best God knows how long.
Right. And when he brought her back upstairs again, he started showing her, he finally allowed her to use clothing again. And this is one of the times that he had showed her just how much preparation he had done in light of her capture. He had really shown every season of clothing. It was all cheap, right? From Macy's, Walmart, stuff like that, which was way below her standards. But he had tons of it, an entire closet full of clothing for her, and nightgowns and nightwear, and his heels, of course, that she was to wear. What kind of impact did it have when she realized just how long he had been preparing for this? I mean, he had given hints up to that point, but now she was being forced to kind of realize he had really prepared for this.
Yeah, it really scared her. She didn't really know what to think, but she knew better than to say something about it. But then, in a reverse way of thinking, uh, the delusion told her, like, well, he did this because he cares about you. He did this because he knew that you'd end up there and he wanted you to be happy. So her mind's making excuses for why this is happening because she psychologically cannot handle the truth behind seeing hundreds of pairs of clothes and shoes and all in her size conveniently. And she's not a very large person. She's very small. So getting all the clothes exactly to fit her kind of threw her off. She was not used to something like that.
Okay, give me just a moment. We're going to take a small break here, and I'll be right back, okay?
Okay.